Welcome to Starseed Counseling, a podcast on mindfulness, compassion, and transpersonal practices. And today I'm with a dear friend who I highly respect. And I'm going to ask you to talk about M&Ms, the sweetness of life, or just mindfulness and mud. So I'll just invite you to introduce yourself to the space and let's jump in. Welcome.
Thank you. Sago Akwego in Yungits, Wagat Nekahaga Nawagi Roda. My name is Ian Sanderson, Mohawk Turtle Clan, teach here at Naropa. And M&Ms. So, yeah, when our first take on this podcast, I came in with mindfulness and meditation, mud and mindfulness.
So let's just start there. What is meditation?
Yeah,
right? Rude medicine. What is this thing that people talk about? Breathing.
I think I said this last time, and I think it still holds true a few weeks later. Whatever activity will focus our minds so we can pay attention to ourselves.
Paying attention to oneself is your definition of meditation.
In this moment.
Thanks. In this moment.
Yeah, that might change. But I think, so if I think about how I've been feeling the last few weeks.
Okay, this sounds personal. Let's get into it. How have you been feeling?
There's no separation, so I look around at the world from, very small circles of relationships to like macro, levels of stuff, and we just need to do better.
Who's we?
Everyone. We just need to do better. That's how I'm feeling in this moment. And I used to shy away from feeling like using words like more, better, or different. Like I don't want to come across as like there's anything wrong or broken about us from a level of the reality of like wholeness, that we are such as we are. It's whole. There's nothing to be repaired or fixed. However, that doesn't mean that there's not improvements that need to be made. Right? If you got an old dilapidated house, there's nothing wrong with the house. It's not a bad house, it's not a good house, it's just a house that's in disrepair. But if we just say, well, the house is just, the house, and this is just the way it is, it ignores the fact that there's like, snow coming through the boards and you're freezing and there's no fire in the fireplace. We need a fire in the fireplace. We need, the walls to be sound. We need for there not to be holes in the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And so the house as it is isn't bad, wrong. It's just not working, and it's not working up to its potential. And I really feel that for most humans right now, that's where we're at. We're not accessing our potential.
Mm-hmm.
And why? We're scared, and deeply afraid. I am. And okay, okay. And if we're just gonna let everything just continue on and not actually work to shift my teacher says that, the headwaters of all human action is the mind. And that's something I believe in also. It's like everything we do, the headwaters, it starts with how we're thinking and perceiving, and all of our conditioned, responses to life, and all the pain and wounds that we have. That's all there's nothing, again, there's nothing wrong with that. It makes sense. And it's like, at what point are we going to actually really like take that on to shift our perception, to shift our relationality, to shift our actions in the world? Or are we just going to try and kick the can down the road a little bit longer and um, foist off our problems onto the next generation to deal with, which is already, yeah, kind of
It's already
happened,
here.
but it's like, how much harder are we willing to let it be for them?
Yeah. So, what I'm hearing though, Ian, is in your definition of mindfulness, it's just the paying attention. And as we're in this context, in this moment, the paying attention is this felt sense of just like do more, see the house. So, in all of that, I feel from you, with you, in you, truth as an aspect of what being mindful is. It's like, yes, acknowledging that things are the way they are, acceptance, but there has to be this quality of truth to it. Because even in the headwaters of the mind, it's like we can't meditate our way out of it, or we can't empty mind our way out of the rest of the home needing repair. And so as I think about that, I really think just of our own pipes and plumbing, like the brass organs of your intestines or your tongue, even starting with all of that. And part of the paying attention is, how well do you feel? Are you burping through your pipes after you eat? You know, are your pipes clogged when you eat and so you don't like eating, or you overeat? I think all of that comes back to this metaphor of the house, the home, the body. And yeah, on one hand, like I think through a lot of spiritual bypass, we could be like, oh, who cares about the body? It just goes back to dust, it goes back to earth. But what I hear you kind of pulling through is this thread that's really necessary for a mindful practice. And it's not just breathe, it's not just be compassion, but it's this blade of truth that I hear coming through.
What you're making me think about is, if we look at natural systems, aka everything, including
Sure.
us, that
Yeah, yeah.
but we just like forget. Um, all life is exchange. Like there's, I would, I will rarely declare anything as truth,
Hmm.
but I will declare that as truth. That there is no anything without exchange. Cells are exchanging everything right now. Breath is being exchanged. Light's being exchanged. Bodies are going through 1,000 different processes of constant 24/7 exchange.
Thanks for giving me your exhale.
Right? Thanks. Same one as the Buddha. Same one. Like it hasn't. It's just been in the system. This is just what's so. Um, and so another way of saying that is life is movement, right? Constant. Even in stillness, right? Even in our most like zenned out state, the amount of movement that's going on in your body is phenomenal, right?
I'm feeling my lungs even as you're talking and I'm silent.
Right. And so, and when, and you know, from your practices, when there's stagnation, when, right, the pipes get clogged, either like the physical pipes or the energetic pipes, dis-ease sets in, right? And it's no different than like damming up rivers and creating stagnation in like a river system. Things start pooling and things start, and so yeah, this is where it's going to sound like a tangent, but it's not. This is where Shaolin monks kind of came from. The story I was told is Bodhidharma came through via India, saw this monastery where these monks had it as like meditation is the thing, like this is the way. And they were there and they were great meditators and they were wasting away and emaciated and malnourished. And he was like, yo, you've kind of fragmented, you've reduced and fragmented and exaggerated. And a critical piece of this whole, right, process and path, but at the expense of everything else. And so he introduced all these body practices, martial practices, right? Because it, you know, sorry, sitting in a room meditating by yourself is not going to save the world.
What?
I'm sorry. I break it to everyone, but I see a lot of see a lot of like, that it's like the secret weapon or something like that. And I'm not disparaging it. It is critical, right? Because we do need space and time to set aside from the constant noise and fear and distraction that we're being fed 24/7. That is, to go into um, a space where you can turn off all that noise and focus that attention, try and let the noise turn down or clear out so that you can see things more clearly about how you're relating to all of that
Mm-hmm.
and why you're relating to it in the way that you're relating to it. And if you don't like how you're some of the ways in which you're relating to it, what might arise to, not necessarily do, because we get very concerned with doing too, right? We see the thing that we don't like. So what can I do differently? And it may be more of a question of like, how do I need to be different? And I know we use that kind of being doing thing a lot. And it's not as binary as that. Um, but that shift in being is what I'm equating to like the headwaters, being the mind is, if everything that we're doing out in the world and day to day and all of our interactions and how we're relating to everyone and everything else, that comes from somewhere, right? It's not random. It comes from somewhere. And it gets locked in, but that doesn't mean it's not mutable. We can transform that. There's a million traditions across thousands of years and thousands of places that have processes, right, for transmuting those things. And I know a lot of people are doing their best with that, and I am too. And if I look at just like the world, I'm back to my original, we need to do better.
And interesting that the contradiction, one of your gifts that I really appreciate is tension, contradiction, non-binary, but we need to do better.
Yeah. We need to be better,
We
and
need
like
to
we also
be
need to do better.
better.
Whatever, English is such a restrictive.
Oh, we riff on this all the
Like, yeah,
time.
well,
The
we're back to it.
confidence.
Like, none of the language that I'm using right now, I feel is adequate to describe everything that we're talking about.
Agreed. Thank you for naming the really confining issues with linguistic applications, because I think that language is really how we think shapes reality, and reality shapes us and how we think. So if we lived underwater aquatically, our words would be quite different. Our thoughts would
Mm-hmm.
be very different. So absolutely, there's so much confounding variables in translation. And English is very much a death language. Good morning. Morning is what we do at a funeral. Or one that I see often in my email, my work life, is a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
They line up soldiers and kill them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, why am I replicating that cognitively,
Mm-hmm.
energetically into the shared field of lexicon, language, sentences? And it is riddled with that. But I do want to kind of pull back to monastic stories. So thank you, the stories of the monk, and methods, and how we can get stuck in our method of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation is the way out when it's a method. Just like hatha yoga is a method. If your collaterals and channels are clogged up, you might like that. Just like compassion is a method, or gratitude, they're methods, but that doesn't ensure that they're not also traps
Mm-hmm.
when we
Mm-hmm.
become too
Mm-hmm.
attached to them. So, one thing you shared, though, that feels really, again, pertinent with this authenticity, this truth piece, is that very rarely do you claim anything to be truth other than exchange. And we're in this sounding board of what is truth, what is real, what is reality. And I hear a lot from the circles I'm in, maybe uh, younger folks developing, growing, high school, adolescent, this texture of I spoke my truth,
Uh-huh.
speaking my truth. And it's so good to speak one's position. But truth is really just it's like a turning table that, depending on context, season, like you said, I don't know how it is today, how it is the now. How do we even get at this moving, ever changing mist of what we call truth.
Mm-hmm. I think part of it is, what you're reminding me of, and I see this in lots of different contexts, and again, in well-intentioned contexts from really good people. We're still trying to figure this out in a hyper-individualistic society, nuclear family thing, which is weird. Like, try and find a culture like ever, aside from this modern Western one, across space and time that has this like mom, dad, 2.5 kids, and then everything else fragmented and spread out. Like, it just kind of doesn't exist. And the, with so many of these ways of being and practices for ways of being traditionally were distributed amongst a system of people, like a tightly knit culture, community. And you would be bound within that. I don't use that in a, people don't like some of the words of, again, English. I don't know how else to say it. It's kind of like yoga, which means like to yoke, right? Like to be connected to something. It's like an ox, on a cart, but it's like, oh, labor, oh, free, restriction, freedom. It's like, no, you're bound to something bigger than you. And that is also providing checks and balances, but also reciprocity to help you navigate this and to keep you, each other in check when you run into those traps, which you inevitably will, because we're humans and we're just trying to figure it out, right? But when we have all of these things that are really great practices, but the kind of like invisible, tacit individuality that's disconnected, right, from all those feedback loops and what we could call co-evolving mutualism of a tight-knit, community, we end up with often more narcissism and more selfishness because people think they've arrived, but there's no one there to keep them in check.
The keeping in check
To be like, not quite.
Totally. The keeping in check. And it almost makes me think of hyper-individualism, not as an endpoint, but a through point. And people get stuck thinking like, oh, that's the peak goal.
Right.
But really, like, individuality is great for a high schooler or a 20-year-old. Like, you've found yourself in the world, you've identified your likes from your family's likes, and you get to be different your way in honor of the system, knowing that you'll eventually thread back into it because you will need support at some point in your life, whether it's financial or physical health, or you birth a baby, whatever the things are, we're in that culturally bound aspect that does, when functioning, creates checks and balances. So I feel like hyper individualization is really a through point of an adolescent. And maybe culturally, in the culture we both live in, which at times is English or what we call America, it's like they're stuck. There's another through point, and that I think can produce a lot of greed. But just to wind down and wrap up, it sounds like truth is a really important ingredient to meeting a mindfulness or meditation practice, which you named as present moment awareness, and knowing that truth is continually changing, it's continually updating. So, in your words, in a minute or so, how might you offer a piece of wisdom, pearl? I don't really like advice. I don't know what that is. I can tell you about my lived experience. I don't know what the A is. But what might you tell some folks who are interested in the slowing down to self-notice?
At the risk of sounding trite or speaking in platitudes, which I can't stand, it's one of those things where, I don't know if we talked about this last time, a lot of really important things, reminders, can be distilled and then disseminated, but they're so distilled and so disseminated that we forget their power. Like, we forget the truth kind of these things. And then they become just kind of like meme tropey things that we just kind of like throw out, and it kind of goes right over our heads in terms of like how critical some of these things are to remember. You
Hmm.
know, the ones popping in my head is "This too shall pass," right? And like this too shall pass. It's and you're like, no, 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 no. Like this too shall pass. It's temporary. It's all temporary. So let's be here as much as we can, like actually here, because a lot of people say that for the hard times, and that's helpful, right? Like if we're really feeling it, to remind ourselves that, like, okay, this is rugged, this too shall pass. That makes sense. Harder, at least in my experience, is reminding yourself of that in the really joyful, loving, connected moments. This too shall pass. And so in either case, can you like be there, right, with it? And the other thing I think about is we are so disconnected from the rest of the natural world and modern society, and people throw out a lot of simple practices, and I think people overlook the power of those simple practices because you kind of have to like crawl, before
Yeah.
you can walk. Everyone wants this like deep, right, like kind of experience when they're looking for it, and they might go on a 3-day retreat and spend a lot of money to have that experience, but they don't know what plants are growing 3 feet out their front door, or in the backyard, or like, what are those ants doing? Who are those birds that are singing in the morning outside your window? Who are they? Why are they singing at that time? Right? What are they singing about? When does that singing change during the seasons? Why? Um, why do you see certain animals certain times in your backyard and not in others? What's happening? Like just like this,
Being.
just what's that tree that's been outside in your backyard for 20 years and you actually still don't know what kind of tree it is?
Oh, it makes me sad. Don't tell me that. What? Oh,
Right?
okay.
Maybe get to know it. Maybe like, what is that tree? Is that tree, did it, arise here in Earth? Was it introduced? Is it helpful? Has it become naturalized? What role does it have in the system? We forget these very, very basic things. We get a lot of people coming wanting, indigenous folks to share traditional ecological knowledge, and that stuff is vast, but it starts with like, you
Get
know,
to know your tree in
get
your
to
home.
just get to know the plants and trees that are just growing out there and the birds that are in those trees, and start building that
Present
connection,
moment
the present
awareness. Just
moment
be here
awareness.
and do better in a cliche way that we can't possibly ripple out. But I just hear the slowing down and I hear the simple. So as we wind down,
Yeah,
thank you, Ian, for
yeah,
being here. I know we're both off to our adventures, so
our
thank you so much.
adventures. I'll leave you with one last thing. The poet David Whyte worked with a koan for like 20 years. It was something like, I'm paraphrasing, um, the birds sing, marking the distinction between heaven and hell. And he sat with that one for a while, and where he got to was, can you hear the birds in that moment? That's the distinction. The birds are singing, you know, and the person who doesn't hear them, that's hell realm. But the person who's like, the birds are singing, that's the heaven realm. That's where he got. But I kind of think that kind of encapsulates. We like here now is what's going on. Can you hear the birds or not?
Thanks. Well, I'm going to go listen to the birds and I'm going to go teach. So
Me too.